All right, we have a pretty full agenda today. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, even though I continue to see the participant numbers ticking upward. So thanks everyone who's joined thus far. For those of you joining us for the first time, my name is Eric Zimmerman. I'm a director at Hadaway Communications, and along with my colleagues who are also on the line, we serve as the Secretariat for the STAT Communications Community. Uh, in our previous webinar 2 weeks ago, we discussed our latest research on vaccine confidence. And one of our key findings is that vaccine skeptics weren't mainly or even mostly conspiracy theorists. Many of them had paid really close attention to what they saw as mixed messages from public health experts or elected leaders. And many of them were skeptical that pharmaceutical companies had their best interests at heart or had studied the vaccines long enough or in enough detail to really be sure of their safety. And so, while they may not have been obsessed with over the top conspiracy theories, they were still reflecting a broader social dynamic that misinformation and conspiracy theories help to foster, which is distrust in institutions. And once we start to erode that trust, even otherwise rational people can find it really difficult to tell truth from lies. So, what we're going to talk about today is where some of those conspiracy theories and misinformation come from, how they work, and how we can deal with them when we're communicating about COVID. To do so, we're really thrilled to be having a conversation with former Congressman Denver Riggleman of Virginia's 5th District. Prior to his time in the House, Congressman Riggleman was an Air Force intelligence officer and later a CEO of an analysis firm specializing in counterterrorism and data science. He is currently a strategist for the Network Contagion Research Institute, which last month released a new report called Contagion of Institutional Distrust, Viral Disinformation of the COVID Vaccine, and the Road to Reconciliation. So we'll be circulating this report right after the webinar, so don't feel as though you have to crib notes from what's on the slide here. And we'll also be referring to it throughout our discussion today. Before we get started, I want to emphasize that we've designed today's conversation to be a bit different than some of our past webinars. We'll have a lot fewer slides and a lot fewer charts and graphs. I think what's on your screen now is probably the last chart that you will see today. And the reason for that is that we want to replace those things with your questions. So please, throughout the conversation, put any questions that you have in the Q&A function, and we'll be fielding those for Congressman Riggleman as they come in. So with that, Congressman Riggleman, thank you. Welcome to the STAT Communications community, and we're so glad that you've taken the time to speak with us today.
Thanks for having me. And I don't know if, you spotlighted my video. Thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate that. I'm very excited to be here. It's been interesting for me. It's been about a year since I started to get in trouble when I started warning about QAnon and conspiracy theories. And now here we are, a year later. And now I'm a chief strategist for the Network Contagion Research Institute. And my life has sort of come full circle based on my counterterrorism past and now what I'm doing today. And it's an honor to be here, right, with the Rockefeller Foundation and with the individuals that invited me. We've had some incredible conversations about what we're going to talk about today. But I've also had some personal experiences and things that have happened in my past that led me here. And again, I find it amazing that not only did I get involved in military intelligence, I was an enlisted guy, went to the University of Virginia, the Air Force sent me there. And while I was there, I sort of got my formulating, experience on how people can hate each other because my major was foreign affairs, but my discipline was the former Yugoslavia. And it was at that point that I realized, sort of the hate buckets that people can put other individuals in or other groups in and the dehumanizing way that they did it. And I had 3 incredible professors there that really led me through this. Me being prior enlisted in the military and then going into the University of Virginia, while being an ROTC, but also learning from individuals that had traveled there, had been in Srebrenica or Sarajevo, right, had been in the Krajina, knew about the Ustashi, all the things that I got to learn about with the Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, and Muslims, what happened in Kosovo, what happened in Bosnia, right, and the hate that you had between religious entities really started to open my eyes to some of the conflicts that maybe I would be involved in, as I graduated from UVA and became a commissioned officer. And wouldn't you know it, 10 months after I was commissioned, I went through intelligence school at Goodfellow Air Force Base in Texas. I was on the Romanian-Serbian border for Operation Allied Force in 1999. And it was then that I learned that an American guy who happened to be on the Serbian border probably shouldn't argue with prior Serbian soldiers and students on the history of their beloved land. And what a lesson I learned. And I also learned that the hate that they had for people that weren't like them was extreme. And the fact that I even argued a little bit against them and confronted them with some of the things that I might have known or maybe, had learned based on my time in country or based on my time at university, I learned that it did not matter, is that their facts, based on the fact that it was their homeland, would always trump what I said. And I was under direct physical harm there for a considerable amount of time. I also got to see what the Romanians did to the Roma there and the dehumanizing way that they treated them. And it started to sort of, it's actually broke me away. I was raised very religious, and it started to break me away from religion in a bit as I started to study mythologies and actually wanted to get a master's instead of going into intelligence and program management in theology. So it was an interesting time for me. And when I came back, I immediately went to the Middle East in 2000, and then it was immediately deployed right after 9/11, where we went after the Taliban in Afghanistan. And I was one of the first to deploy there with the Air Expeditionary Wing out of Mountain Home Air Force Base. And the reason I'm telling you all this is I never thought my education, not only at the University of Virginia, but also my education as a military intelligence officer, would lead me to fighting disinformation and fighting terror specifically at the National Security Agency and being brought into big data when I had a liberal arts degree, a foreign affairs degree. But I was able to look at that data in a way other people didn't. That was Mike Pence's flying around. I apologize. So those are some of the issues that I got to deal with right off the bat.
Yeah.
And then when I started tracking Soleimani in 2006, 2007, started my own company doing these type of things, I started getting into critical infrastructure, predictive analysis, and cyber, and actually looking at how bad actors transferred information using social media. Got taught a little bit in steganography, looking at hidden messages within unclassified web pages. So I just got this incredible education, everyone. And by the time that I sold my company in 2012, I thought I was pretty much done with this. But the Pentagon called me back and then put me right into being the senior consultant for electronic warfare and countermeasures for the Pentagon. And at that point, guess what I got to do? Instead of doing electronic warfare and countermeasures, they saw my past and said, Denver, could you use algorithmic warfare principles or predictive analysis principles to identify how communication is running through bad actors in the South China Sea and also up in near Russia? So what a life. But again, you've heard no politics, no politics to this time until I accidentally won my congressional race in 2018, despite some awful disinformation that was passed about me that went national, which actually had them making fun of me on Saturday Night Live on something that was completely made up. And my head almost exploded because I'm wondering, how is it that my whole life has been trying to fight this and I get affected by it? And now I got this happening. This is really an interesting thing for me. And I had a little bit of fun with it, but it was pretty horrific for my family. And then 2 years later, I lose because of disinformation after a same-sex wedding when I was accused of being funded by George Soros to change the sexual orientation of children by churches around my district. And it was at the time that I really started to see QAnon coming into that presence in 2019. And my fight became pretty vicious.
Yeah.
So here I am, right? And as I'm learning about this, I just want to tell you I have a perspective that might be a little bit different from scholars and people who've been studying QAnon specific ideologies or conspiracy ideologies, whether it's based on New World Order, whether it's based on 9/11 truthers or fake moon landings or QAnon or whatnot, is that a lot of people look at it from sort of a sociological or psychological way. And I'm not saying this in a bad way. I always looked at it from a targeted perspective. Like, how do you stop the spread? We never really looked at the internals of why the spread was happening. My job was always to stop the spread, regardless of who was starting it. And it's nuanced, but it meant that my whole thing when I was looking at data wasn't why that person believed, but how we stop that person from spreading that social virus or that contagion to somebody else who might act on it as a bad actor. So that's really where I came from. And I think that's why the Network Contagion Research Institute picked me up and said, listen, you have a different perspective just based on your military background, but also sort of your analysis background. It's a little different from ours. You do have a big data background, but also your congressional background when you were on the subcommittee for artificial intelligence and machine learning. So again, it's been it's an honor to be here because I love discussing this. I'm pretty open-minded. I don't know if I have all the answers. I know how to find people. I know how to get to them. Sometimes I just don't know how to stop them.
Right.
And that's really been the thing, Eric, is that how do you, if you know where it's coming from, you know who it is, you know the groups that are involved, but you have sort of handcuffs on what you're allowed to do. And the reason I said it about targeting, Eric, is this: is that if we found bad actors, in a foreign battle space, we simply eliminated the threat. Um, and it's a different thing here, right? You can't do that. The threat is, how do you eliminate the threat using, our First Amendment rights, or using the tools that we have available to us to stop people from radicalizing others, or stop people from doing things like what happened on January 6th. So, Eric, I know you want me to take 5 to 7 minutes. I hope that wasn't too long. But that's where I'm coming from. That's my background. And a lot of it's operational. So there certainly could be people smarter than me on the psychology of these individuals. But what I do have is I have on the ground anecdotal evidence with people that confronted me physically who wanted to hurt me based on their conspiracy theories, and even within my own family, and my personal experience on the ground overseas, which is pretty nuts. So, but anyhow, I'm happy to go from there, Eric, and thanks for allowing me to introduce myself and at least give people my background on what I've done.
Of course, and thank you for that. And we're looking forward to drawing on that expertise, as we go. And you've touched in a few of your examples on what I was hoping to talk about next, which is that conspiracy theories to an outsider can seem completely absurd and unreasonable and scary. But I think it's also important for us to understand the psychological mechanism that makes people believe them and that makes them so tempting to people who are in difficult situations. There's a line, in your report that I wanted to highlight that I think, states this well. Conspiracy theories are a method of grappling with uncertainty. They represent an explanatory framework that works to make sense of a world that, to the conspiracy theorist, is chaotic and threatening. Especially when things seem out of control, it is easier to accuse evildoers of secretly controlling the world than it is to accept that bad things happen for complex and sometimes unknown reasons. And now, we're kind of in a difficult moment in time where there are unfortunately lots of bad things happening for complex and unknown reasons. And kind of ironically, it is conspiracy theories and misinformation themselves that may be stopping us from getting out of that. So we're stuck in a sort of a reinforcing cycle. Based on your experience, how can we start to break that cycle in small ways? How can we take the first step to unwinding this relationship between misinformation and the events that are related to?
Well, I thought I had the answer, Eric. If you asked me in 2018, right after my experiences in the military, when I had no political experience, I would say blunt force facts. We're just going to hit them with blunt force facts. We can be compassionate, but once I give them the facts and I give them the policy prescriptions, and I'm the guy telling them how it is, and they know they can trust me, for goodness sakes, I shall not tell a lie, right? I know I can do this. Look at my background. I have this baseline of experience that's going to be very difficult to push back against. This is how it's going to work. And Eric, you can imagine how that worked. That was not how it worked with a lot of the individuals that I talked to. And I'm going to give you an example. This is a bad example as far as it's uncomfortable for people to hear this example, but it was somebody rather close to me, and it happened in my hometown. And they said, hey, the reason that they sent all the El Salvadorans here was to change the elections and to spread sickness amongst our community. Now, how do you argue with that? And if I say, okay, first of all, that's a little racist, right? I mean, right, that's not a good thing. But if you say, well, actually, here's what happened. There were this amount of refugees allowed based on DHS's, top line cap, right? You have certain areas that are already accepting these individuals. That's why they go to these areas. To say that immigrants are bad or somehow just spreading diseases is not correct. Actually, it's fundamentally incorrect. Here are the stats that you have. If you want to go to the DHS reports or you want to go to the CBB reports, the only reason I know this stuff, guys, is I've actually supported the Department of Homeland Security when I was a contractor and also military, or Customs and Border Patrol then. But so I said, so I went down the list with these individuals. I'm not kidding. They said, well, you're lying. Now, that is a very difficult thing. That's a very difficult hurdle to get across because they're emotionally invested in this. And they didn't understand that to them, something that wasn't even bad, that they thought was bad, was happening. I'm even going into another layer, is that if they believe their way of life is being attacked, they automatically ascribe some kind of outside force that is conspiring against them. And I saw this a lot, even in my religious days, right, when I was being brought up. But I've seen it more and more in groups that I've come in contact here, even in certain portions of Virginia. And I try not to come across, just like I said, is that we got to have compassion and things like that. And I have been guilty of getting angry. I've been guilty of going after somebody very directed if I thought they were saying things that were either just completely off, or going after a group of people, especially after I conducted that same-sex wedding, which if I went through the awful things I heard by constituents and voters, you would be appalled. That is not, I don't want to even present these, individuals as stupid or ignorant. But when you're in that echo chamber, when you're in that group of individuals and that's all you hear, and you can pre-select your echo chambers based on your social media hotline that you have, it's almost like drug use. You're mainlining this disinformation electrons directly into your frontal lobe. And our job, right, is to try to actually cut off that line. The worst thing for me is that when it is close family, when it is friends that I've lost 4 friends of over 30 years based on QAnon specifically, and also on anti-Semitic stuff that I pointed out to them, but they refused to even heed on any level. Is that how do we do this? How do you express to somebody that not only are those bad things happening for complex reasons, but the things that are actually happening aren't bad?
Right.
That, Eric, that's the thing that you have to get that. And if there's everybody on this call today, is that there are some individuals, something you don't even believe is wrong, or you don't even sense as being something that's sideways. They're already down the rabbit hole that it's sideways. They're already in it, and pulling them up is very difficult. And again, I say it's facts-based, sort of blunt force facts or trauma that you have to give to them. But I would say now, I think there's probably not a huge percentage that you can actually bring over to your way of thinking using facts at this point, but we still need to identify them somehow, and we're trying to figure that out.
Yeah. And I know we have one question here in the Q&A. I want to just ask one more of our own questions, Caroline, then I'll turn it over to the Q&A. What we've been talking about so far is sort of the internal psychology, that makes misinformation and conspiracy theories tempting. But there's another aspect of this, which is kind of the social or national psychology that leads to when it happens on a mass level. There's one other passage here in the report that I wanted to highlight, which is that one way to corrode liberal democracy is to undermine support for its institutions. Mixed messages and double standards in both censorship and public health restrictions appear to validate conspiracy theorists' claims. And for most of the folks on this call, and for most people dealing with COVID on a daily basis, there's a very fine line between mixed messages and new information. So with COVID, we don't always have the answers yet, or the answers may change from one week or month to the next. What advice would you give to people trying to communicate about these delicate, complicated topics for how to deal with this uncertainty without, putting more fuel on the fire?
Yeah, when I was an intelligence officer, it was always the caveats, right? Is that here are the courses of action that we think is correct, but we're not exactly sure. And we always had to point out the difference between the possible and the probable, right? And what I saw at the beginning was, you had the first individual saying you don't have to wear a mask, and somebody says you have to wear a mask depending on who's talking, depending on what level of government that they're in. And for me, being in Congress at the time, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. We don't really know what the hell's going on, right? There's some people who just don't know, it's, we're chasing our own tail as we're trying to get our arms around COVID. And if you remember last February, last March, I own a business also. The messages were insane. And here I am in Congress trying to decipher the state level, federal level, local messaging on what we could do to even keep our business open or keep our employees in line. The issue that I had was I had the experience and perspective that I realized people were just trying to do the best they could. There's an incredible line, and I know people have heard this, but I first heard it actually from one of my intelligence instructors. He goes, "Hey, Den," he goes, "never ascribe something to a conspiracy that you can ascribe to stupidity," right? So that's something that I've always kept with me, is that I understood I had to parse through the messages, make the best decision I could. But it's not like that. You have a social media and media empires that are actually trying to feed and trying to breed these echo chambers and these ecosystems, and I call them disinformation hubs. So the issue is how do you, as a media, in the media or as a public official, how do you keep the politics out of your specific answer? And then how do you caveat it in a way that the general public realizes that you might not have the 100% answer? And what I found out is it's very difficult to do, because if I came out and said, hey, I just found out that you got to wear 2 masks, the blowback was absolutely stunning here in my local area, I'll be honest with you. Or the fact that I had 6 people, I've had about 300,000 people come to our distillery, maybe more, maybe 400,000. But I would say since we opened, but I would say in the last month, I've tried to engage people practically while they're drinking bourbon. We have 2,000 a day come through on Saturdays and say, hey, Denver, man, can you believe the election was stolen? And this is a banker with a master's, or you have people that are highly educated saying this. And as I go through this, Eric, I'm having a tough time parsing what they heard from where. And I'll give you this last example, and this should scare the heck out of people. Even today, a very close family member of mine is in the hospital with COVID, said it was not real, anti-vax, all that. Went online, and before he got to the hospital, until my brother got to him, who's a registered nurse, was going to fill a nebulizer full of hydrogen peroxide to cure himself. I guess I was much more optimistic a few months ago. And I know you would think after January 6th, we should be more optimistic. We should not be. I think we need to double down on this. And I think we need to have some kind of private-public partnership, a Center for Disinformation Defense, something that identifies, identifies the type of data that we're seeing, people that are spreading disinformation or people that are not. And Eric, again, I think when you're talking about mixed messages and double standards, what I've been trying to tell people is that somebody being inept doesn't mean they're evil, or they give you the wrong information doesn't mean there's a conspiracy theory that COVID was put here to help socialism and to name George Soros president, right? That is not why it happened. But again, anything bad that happens will sort of validate what they already believe. And I think I would end with my examples, the J&J vaccine with the 6 women who had blood clots. The sewer of American politics runs through my phone, and my phone exploded with people saying, I told you so. Denver, I told you the vaccines were bad. I told you they were awful, right? Yeah. That's the issue that you have, Eric, is how do you get across? That's why I say on this thing, I don't know if I have all the solutions, but I do think we need to have some kind of private-public partnership that identifies these bad actors and these disinformation lines so that people can make their own decisions based on facts. How you disseminate it, I'm still trying to figure that out.
Absolutely. Caroline, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know we have a few questions in the chat.
Yes. So one kind of a good one following that is, do you feel that banning people or content on social media stops, spreads, or only feeds the fire of theory? What is your perspective? And that's from Jordan Mathis.
Hey, thanks, Jordan. You want to hear the most incredible intelligence analyst officer answer of all time? It depends. So it depends. So there's something in the intelligence field called intelligence gain loss, or IGL. And what that was is we had to make decisions on targeting lines, whether we actually attack the target and eliminate the target, or we allow the target to continue to transmit so that we could get more intelligence information. That intelligence gain loss equation is what I actually try to use every time I think about this. So here's what happens when you deplatform somebody. And I want to present this to the audience so you can think about this. And it might be a different thing than you've ever heard before. With the NCRI, or if I used to have red teams in the open source space. Even when I ran the counter IED cell, we had an open source collection platforms, right? That would scrape or look at websites all over the world, or look at press releases, look at tenders, look at corporate mergers, look at acquisitions. And I'm talking about in threat areas. And the issue that we had is that sometimes somebody would cut that feed off based on an arbitrary decision, and we didn't have a collector. We could not see what was happening. It was very disconcerting, especially during military operations. What happens if you deplatform whole thing, right? You just take down, boom, you take down Gab, or you take down Parler, or you deplatform somebody on YouTube. Yes, you're stopping that sort of, they're not mainlining with that specific drug, right? Yeah. The issue that we saw immediately after that was a mass migration to Zello, MeWe, Telegram, Signal, Rumble, right? And so when you're seeing all these people start to migrate to platforms, they're also migrating to image boards that are encrypted or have trip codes. or just using simple email. And what I found too is that, like I said, my email now explodes with people still, I mean, people in Republican committees knowing that I am not based on the definition of a Republican in Virginia right now. I just don't meet that definition, right? I am some kind of tribeless wanderer, right? That's wandering between the center left and center right wickets, right? They still send me all this because I have an R behind my name, and the things that I'm getting on email are pretty bad. Whether it's and I say bad in a way like this, whether it's a pastor throwing out a biblical prophecy, right, that Joe Biden's going to die in June and Trump's coming back, which they probably don't understand the Constitution with the whole vice president thing, or the fact that President Biden probably isn't, right? And so when you get these type of things, the issue that I have is as this sewer continues to sort of, explode, is, I mean, how do we get in front of it? So, and can we get in front of it if I can't see what's happening? And we have to have some way, and we did have a matrix. We sort of had a way of looking at based on the danger. It was arbitrary on the danger presented to our military troops and whether we eliminated the target or collected on the target. I need to have that same matrix, and I need to build that, I think, in a way that's almost algorithmic. But to think that it goes away with deplatforming is a really bad assumption based on the fact that there's so many ways for people to connect to each other on social media today. And there's ways that we just can't see in the open source world. And there's no way to task that many intelligence assets as far as authorities are concerned to look at all of them in sort of the encrypted world. And that's always the issue I have. I don't have the exact answer, but I think overarching deplatforming can be very damaging to seeing where this information is coming from also.
Interesting.
Great.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Caroline, let's do one more question.
Absolutely. So this one is from Carolyn Hembry. Two questions, actually. Is there a way to inoculate people against falling for conspiracy theories and disinformation? And then how do you go about repairing relationships with those whose vehement belief in conspiracy theories ruined relationships?
Oh, goodness. I've talked about a digital vaccine for some time, and, how we stop that social contagion. That's a great question. And, for me, again, I talked about the CDD, the Centers for Disinformation Defense. And this is something that might be esoteric or, something we got to really reach for. But I've always wondered, can we inoculate when they're young? And I've wondered, can we have some kind of education or some kind of way of teaching children, starting maybe at middle school or high school or something like that, what a facts-based analysis looks like or what sourcing looks like. And again, going back to considering my training, it was always about the top three things you got to look at in intelligence are the source, and the source, right? And I wonder if we can inoculate at a younger age by having some kind of education way of doing things where you have, sort of build up this anti or counter disinformation or pro fact way of teaching, children how to actually do their own research in a critical way, but also by almost giving them the intelligence background sort of teaching. And I don't know if that would work, but that's something I would love to do. The other thing too is that, again, I think there's a lot of fear from people like me stepping into a crowd of 50 and telling the truth or the truth online. And I think what you're seeing right now, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic, is that the very people that can offer that digital vaccine are unwilling to do it based on the fact that they're making money, based on it's their career, right? Or some other, platform that they want to push. And that's the thing, is that when you have, like in Congress, when I stood up to talk about QAnon, besides the ranker for the committee, I was the only Republican to speak against QAnon. And I had people promising to come down and talk to me about it, or would stand up and tell the public that this was rubbish, that this could lead to violence. A half dozen of them said, Denver, we wanted to come down, but once we looked at our district polling, we saw that we would lose our election.
Yeah.
That is very difficult. So if you can't have a digital vaccine based on public figures telling the truth, that's difficult. And so there has got to be a way, right, where policy sort of trumps this disinformation that's coming out. But we do have an issue. And I've told people, crazy is not party specific, but the far right is in a hold my beer moment right now. And, we're going to have to do something to stop this. And it's going to have to be people like me that almost came from that environment and saw that, wait a minute, we got Lord of the Flies going on right now. There's an issue. I need to get in front of this. But those people really, there's not a whole lot of them percentage wise right now that are willing to go that far out there. So I think it's based on education. It's based on people presenting facts in a way that has some courage, but it's also based on, I do think we need a private-public partnership to spread good information and identify those bad actors. As far as bringing people back from the brink, and I did remember this part of the question, or how you get to them. You would think my own family, I could figure that out. I will give you in a percentage. I would say out of the 400 or 500 people I've talked to personally about, say, Stop the Steal, I've been able to convince about 10 of them. And the way I did it, instead of using a bunch of facts and a bunch of crazy facts and my overwhelming sense of, being a smart guy, not really, but that was, I just, the one thing that worked for me. And I want to tell you this perfect. And I know this is the most anticlimactic thing in the history of this conversation right now. But the thing is this, is that I said, hey, if this election was fixed, and it was the dumbest argument, I thought, but I said, well, why in the heck, if this election was fixed, then the Democrats just go ahead and take supermajorities in the House and the Senate? And if you're participating in algorithmic warfare, why would you just specify one algorithm for the president who couldn't really who has a really difficult time getting his agenda through? And the fact is, it looks like the House will be taken from the GOP will take back the House in 22 based on redistricting and based on polling. And that is the only thing that's really worked for me in order to change people's minds on Stop the Steal specifically. When you're talking about George Soros or space lasers, or you're talking about the NSA changing votes, you're talking about the cabal of Democrats out there right now, I would say still the biggest underlying thing right now that we'd have to fight is people in certain segments in the far right still believe that the Democrats really were connected to Epstein, and that they do have a cabal that does steal children. That's been a tough nut for me to crack. And it's really, that seems to be the craziest thing. It seems the one that's taken the most root and the more, the far reaches of the conspiratorial section of the GOP.
Well, it seems as though, one dynamic that you're describing there is that misinformation, or deciding to disentangle yourself from disinformation, isn't just about the facts themselves as much as how the lie becomes entangled with a tribal identity that you do not want to exclude yourself from.
Why would you?
What are techniques that you might use? This is another big question, but how can we start to disentangle the social identity that people are clinging to from the misinformation that has suddenly become identical with it?
The hard thing about these kind of answers, or some of mine are fairly brutal, and I don't want to. It's very difficult. First of all, you don't want to fight disinformation with disinformation. I have some issues with that right now with other individuals, right? But it's very difficult. When you have a conversation with an individual, Eric, that says, listen, what you're saying makes sense, but God told me it's different. Or, I'm with 60 people in a committee meeting down in Southside, Virginia, and I say, listen, all of us are judged, right, in a way on how we treat others. This was what I said in a speech. I said, but we also need to remember the 14th Amendment, right, where everybody is treated equally before the law. That statement seems pretty innocuous. What I didn't realize is that 55 out of the 60 people in there were part of a group that thought that the 14th Amendment was put there to destroy white heritage. That was not a great conversation, right? How do you disentangle America from a belief system that might be based on the supernatural, or might be based on the fact that they have this good against evil mentality? And I think the thing you got to do is you got to break down the fact that it's not good against evil. I've been fairly successful with some individuals, but most people will say, listen, we used to like you, but we think that you have been taken over. The Democrats have paid you off. You're a traitor. We still think you're a funny guy. We still want to drink a beer with you, but you're a traitor to the country. I've had that exact statement, by the way. I wish that I had the answer for you, Eric, on the disentanglement. There might be smarter people on this call who see some kind of social way to do this based on legislation or policy, but it seems like the more policy you put out to try to identify what facts are, you immediately get in the way of those individuals where those facts go against their sort of good against evil life view. And I think that's the biggest challenge we do have is your question. And I'm sorry, I wish I had a solution for that.
No, we have plenty more webinars ahead of us. So this is
okay. I will.
But I do want to transition to some of the more COVID specific findings in the report that I think start to meld these dynamics with conspiracy theories more generally with some of the topics that we're confronting on a day-to-day basis here. I thought one really interesting finding was that in the report, you all studied anti-vaccine protests across the country on a county by county basis.
Yeah.
And looked for the statistical predictors of where an anti-vaccine protest is most likely to occur. And the three that you identified was a county's history of intimidating counter protests, especially regarding Black Lives Matter, the severity of the COVID lockdown restrictions in that county, and searches for New World Order on Google. Now, most of us on this call, as we've been dealing with vaccine skepticism have been wringing our hands trying to figure out how can we explain this vaccine or these vaccines in a better, more accurate, more motivating way. So my question, to be a bit provocative, is there a good amount of this vaccine skepticism that really has not much to do with the vaccine itself based on what you found here?
Yes. Chaos seems to, it's what people identify as chaos, seems to make these conspiracy theories or these searches bloom. The thing that really struck me was after the LA Dodger Stadium, I think it was the stadium protest. When we looked at that, this was back in February. And this is what really started us looking at this in a very bizarre way, because we saw this indicator, this spike, that a brand new hashtag erupted in late January, right after the Dodger Stadium vaccine protest of COVID-19 84. I don't know if you guys have heard this or not. So we saw COVID-19 84. So Jake Tapper and Anderson Cooper, they called me. I sent them, what I was looking at. And they said, "Hey, Dan, would you come on the program?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So February 3rd, I was on Jake Tapper, February 4th on Anderson Cooper. And I mentioned that COVID-19 84 and anti-vax or New World Order conspiracy theories seem to be blooming in places where we're seeing protests, where we're seeing severe lockdown restrictions. And this is before the report, guys. But it seemed interesting to me that anytime you had any type of chaos in these areas, that you saw this bloom, right, of new conspiracy theories or this amalgamation or, a switch in the superiority of one. Like we saw Q, and then all of a sudden New World Order flipped itself, and it's coming back. New World Order, like I said before, is like the Motley Crue, reunion tour, right? It's back, right, with a vengeance. And I said on February 3rd on Jake, and on February 4th on Anderson Cooper, Anderson's like, "Well, how do you stop this?" I'm like, "I wish I knew. I just know where it's starting, right? We can see it. We need to get in front of it." Well, would you know, guys, on February 10th, and I'm sorry if I remember these dates because it struck me. February 10th, Breitbart. Do you know what their trending thing was on Breitbart, on Twitter, on Breitbart? Was COVID-19 84. Breitbart, a very large far-right publication, was talking about these vaccine issues in February in a way that was very aggressive and completely wrong. Yeah. So, when you're looking at what's happening in these areas and these blooms, it really does come from chaos. And, if you look at Black Lives Matter, right, and you see Black Lives Matter protests, those individuals who really hated that somehow, or they believed in some kind of fiction, or they thought, the United States was, somehow allowing this to happen where things were being destroyed. It has to be a conspiracy. What's going on here? Or lockdown restrictions, which you guys, as you all know, right, that all starts from Soros and the Rothschilds and Bill Gates funding the Wuhan lab. And then, searches for New World Order on Google, which, as all of you know, that the global cabal is about to take us over. You mix that together, and that ball of awful becomes, there's a good against evil, and you better be on the good side, and we got to fight. Yeah. And I'll just tell you, here in Virginia, what really shocked me is we saw where these searches were going on. The top three areas, if I can remember, was the Hampton Roads area on the coast, Henrico County right around Richmond, and then Culpeper, the rural town just north of my district here, right, that sort of splits the 7th and the 5th district of Virginia. Those were the three blooms. And I'm like, well, why them, right? Look at Hampton Roads, You look at Henrico and Richmond, you look at Culpeper, these three things sort of lined up. And, it's just the New World Order search has really got to me, right? It's just everywhere. But the anti-vax protests are really hooked to this. And what we've also seen, and you guys probably know this, and if I'm telling you something, just ignore this part, but seeing the massive amount of organic health grift that's going on in the anti-vax space is huge. Even to the fact I went to a doctor and they said, Denver, just take zinc. You don't have to worry about a vaccination. And that was, a chiropractor or some doctor, over there. So, we're seeing this also. There's a lot of money to be made on this, guys. And again, I know we're talking about what we're seeing with these blooms, but these blooms really are money makers for certain types of conspiracy theorists and grifters and things like that, especially if you want to buy, something that, combines zinc and lunar moon dust, that'll, get you over, the COVID sickness. But yeah, it's really been interesting to see where these blooms begin.
All right.
Congressman, I have a great question from Eileen O'Connor, kind of about what you just mentioned. Says, should we take the profit out of misinformation and disinformation? In other words, instead of highlighting emotional content, which is often more opinion and misinformation that causes people to click or stay online, should we tax revenues from ads sold on sites that promote misinformation?
Holy cow, I've never heard that idea. that's pretty interesting. I think algorithmically you could do it. I think the issue is who would choose what that disinformation or misinformation is, right? I mean, that's a tough one, a brilliant idea, I think, but I'm wondering, who would be the arbiter of where that taxable revenue would come from, right? Or if it is disinformation or misinformation, is somebody just screwing up? Is there, a piece of truth there where there's only a percentage of that's disinformation or misinformation? So pretty interesting. I wish we could take the profit motive out of it, but sadly, I don't know if you guys have seen. What I should have sent, and I think of it now, right after we're done, is some of the fundraising flyers that I'm getting, and there's some people that help me get on this call who know exactly what I'm talking about, Carolyn. But some of these fundraising flyers that actually are still using "Stop the Steal" or sort of wrapping election integrity language around it, or some other language. It's right on the edge of conspiracy theories where they're actually fundraising in a political sense. So not only is it the profit motive, which your question or your idea really interesting. I don't know how you would execute it yet, but yeah, I'm just trying to put my mind on that. But on the other side there's also a political motive that is also based on profit, fundraising money, and making sure that you're the most powerful member because you can raise the most money in the hyperbolic language that you're using. So I think another question is when it comes to free speech or political speech or flyers, should they be limiting what they're saying based on the fact that they're raising money on lies and disinformation? So there's a lot of levels to this. Again, just a novel idea. I just don't know how. Again, I don't know who the arbiter of that would be, and if there's and Carolyn, you're happy to give my email. If somebody has an idea on that, that's an interesting thing to me. But again, I don't know if you can use algorithms to fight algorithms, right? I don't know. You can, but it'd be an interesting battle. And again, that might be a technical rabbit hole that'd be very difficult for us to get our arms around.
Yeah. Congressman, I have one more question here, then I'm going to turn it back to Caroline for a bit more of the Q&A. I wanted to follow up on this idea that we were discussing a moment ago, which is that many of us have faced challenges either in a personal or professional context, trying to talk someone out of conspiracy theories, and it somehow only makes the problem. Not only do we fail, but we can make the problem worse and deepen their conspiratorial thinking by the way that we engage them. There was a passage in the report that I thought was a very vivid way of describing this, which is that while we must not withhold truth where it is merited, we must also avoid dehumanizing the culprits, because like a piñata, conspiracy theories are falling out like candy when we beat them too aggressively. So what's the dynamic that leads someone to deepen their conspiratorial thinking, and what should we try to do instead, whether we're successful or not, just to avoid making the problem worse?
I've made a lot of mistakes here. When I first got really angry about QAnon, part of it was very personal, right? It wasn't just my family and very close friends. It was the fact that I was getting my face ripped off by a major part of my constituency. I was getting death threats, which was really not cool, especially for my family. Death threats, some that were so vile, that it was hard to believe that somebody would actually, talk about this. So I lashed out pretty hard. I think I had a tweet that went viral where I said QAnon had the same number of letters as moron. I said, QAnon was the mental gonorrhea of conspiracy theories. And a part of it was this military wanting to fight a little bit. And what I found out is that, like, for instance, here in my district, when somebody said, hey, you're trying to change children's sexual orientation, and said some awful things about the couple I married, I got very angry on a radio show. And I said, if you want to come after me, pack a lunch, because I'll fight you in the streets all day, something like that. That probably wasn't the best way to go about it initially. Even with my training, it was pure anger. And what happened is I'd already been dehumanized. And by calling them stupid and things like that, I was just sort of, I think I was just maybe giving them the ammo to say, listen, that guy is who we thought he was, right? And that he is a secret deep state actor that's being paid by George Soros to push the anti-QAnon message. And by the way, I just want to tell everybody in this call, there's a new conspiracy theory that's come out that my wife is actually money laundering through our distillery, because I'm being paid by foreign governments to destroy the righteous on the QAnon side, which just came out on Twitter yesterday. And by the way, I think I'd be a good money launderer. I just want everybody to know that, but I'm not doing that, right? I'm not going to be laundering money through foreign governments to destroy those who have found out about the deep state cabal that's being run by Satan worshiping, bloodsuckers.
But that's not exactly what you would say if you were doing that.
Yeah. That's exactly right, Eric. And by the way, Eric just actually role played a QAnon believer at a committee meeting. So, but that's the issue that we have, is that when I was able to come at this at a more fact-based level, especially, and I practiced, right? The anger that I had at what was happening was sort of overwhelming my sensibilities there for a couple months. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I wasn't even taught this. This isn't in my training, not in de-escalation, interrogation school, whatever. I've just become an angry guy because of the things that are being thrown at me. And I'm telling you, you're an idiot, right? Like on a radio show, I said, hey, there's an amazing power to stupid people in large groups, and I think you're in that group. You probably shouldn't do that, right? You're just engendering more hate. So I think that's the issue that we have, is how do we do this with compassion and, dare I say, love of our fellow men and women in these groups, and how do we do it in a way where we're facts-based, and if they're screaming at you, say, hey, listen, I understand that's your belief, but I would love to talk to you about this more if we can in the future. Here's my phone number, and I'm doing this. Here's my phone number. Here's my email. And it's a lot, guys. I get a lot of correspondence, but it's allowing me to learn how individuals are thinking. And it's really, and I'm getting invited now to places I didn't think I'd get invited to ever again, because I'm like, I just want to hear where you're getting this information. And I've been able to really start to help with people sourcing, and say, hey, you know what, a meme with a picture beside it and a quote probably means that's made up. It might not be made up, but it could be made up. A meme is not a source, right? Probably shouldn't do that. And then but again, it's still very slow. It's a slog, but I would humbly submit to everybody that, what I did a few times with, and I still get there sometimes. I have friends in a PR firm and consultant friends who help me in my campaigns. Like, they wince and laugh at the same time when I say some things, but I'm actually trying to be better. And I hope that I hope that we don't go down the road of where, when we're being dehumanized, we automatically dehumanize the other side and exacerbate the issue. Because if they already believe that it's good against evil, we are just sort of, I think, affirming their belief systems. And I know that's awful. I know we want to fight. I do. But the only thing I can say is that if we keep dehumanizing, I've had firsthand experience. I've lost friends I thought could take it. Like, dude, what have you been sniffing glue? That doesn't help when you're having a discussion of why you believe in QAnon. So, don't use the "are you sniffing glue" arguments. I think you got to be more compassionate, right? And still try to use facts, even though it's just a long, long, hard road to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Caroline, what other questions do we have?
Great. This is from Autumn. She says, from anti-vax leaders, I've heard you might have data, but we have stories. How do you counter a false narrative that benefits from emotional stories and no need to prove facts?
Oh gosh, that's the fight, ain't it? Yeah, you're right. I mean, how do you fight a false narrative that's based on stories that are anecdotal from Aunt Mary, right, who grew a third eyeball because she got the second Moderna vaccine, right? And that I've had those stories said to me. I still have. I wish I could show you guys my Facebook messages that I get from people even within my own family talking about a story that, we heard that, old Jimmy John, down in the woods, he went and got his J&J vaccine. They talked about blood clots. Well, his head just plumb exploded, right? That's a difficult thing to get over, right? That's a hard thing to argue. But when I see those type of narratives and stories, usually the question I ask, and I said, well, who told you that story? Where did you hear that story? Well, on the internet, which is the problem I'm having in my family also. Like, so you saw it on the internet. Could you tell me what site you saw it on the internet? Or, oh, well, I saw it here. Well, so you don't really know if it's true. Well, it's got to be true because I heard that somebody else had happened to. Well, where did you get that information? Well, my sister's cousin stepbrother. Well, who is your, what's the name of your sister, cousin, stepbrother? So what I try to do every time I have these conversations, I try to nail down the source. And that's why I think I'm a little bit successful sometimes when it comes to stories beating data. To say that's easy, it's not. But I think right now with the stories, a lot of those stories are pushed on social media. And I am seeing a rehash of some of those stories and people I'm talking to around the district, but also with people that are texting me all the time about this or still messaging me. And if you remember, I got thousands of friends. Yes, it does. Autumn is right. I just saw her message pop up. The energy to counter those stories are huge. They're huge. I try to use humor. I try to do that. But if I were to tell you I'm not as exhausted as I've ever been in this fight today, I am. I put out a book called Bigfoot It's Complicated, which they thought it was Bigfoot erotica at first. And that's another disinformation story I'd love to tell. Do not look at Google images for Bigfoot erotica. I'm number one. But I wrote this book about disinformation and then had disinformation about the book so they could beat me in an election that they didn't beat me in 2018. But in the book, I talked about these belief systems and trying to counter the stories. The issue that I had on them is that when I had the story, for instance, I had somebody tell me that I knew about Fort Lewis and that a Army private had shot a Bigfoot and then NSA hit it and they sent it to Area 51. And that as an intelligence officer, I would know that. I'm like, as an intelligence officer, I could never know that. I wouldn't even be read into something that ridiculous. The guy took that as that I was affirming his story by denying it because that's what an intelligence officer would do. Wrap your arms around that logic. Yeah. So it is exhausting to fight those narratives. But I think, again, use compassion and facts. But I would say always run them to the source. It really messes them up. Trust me. So it really does.
I've got one. I know we have a few more questions, but I have one final question that I want to get to because I think it's an important one just to contextualize this conversation. We've been talking a lot, and for good reason, about the craziest conspiracy theories, the people who are the furthest off, the deep end when it comes to this type of thinking. And while they attract a lot of attention, hardcore conspiracy theorists do represent, I believe, a tiny, tiny fraction of the population. Nevertheless, we can start to see their thinking, the grains of that information, bits and pieces of it, start to flow into the rest of the conversation in a way where people don't even realize, that the information they've received has come from a conspiracy theory. So tell us a bit about, strategically, while we shouldn't conflate all anti-vaxxers with the craziest conspiracy theories, how we should think about the relationship between what we've been talking about today and maybe the more run-of-the-mill concerns about vaccines that we're more likely to encounter.
Well, the issue I think you're bringing up, Eric, is how do we have an honest conversation if we have one side that has the inability to see facts-based arguments anyway, even though if there could be issues. And that was part of what we were talking about is, what if there is a kernel of truth in some of this? What if maybe Johnson & Johnson should have studied it more before blood clots? I can say that and just say, it's 6 out of 6.8 million. I mean, the percentages are very low. There's percentages that are higher for, over-the-counter drugs or, even birth control, which my daughter immediately sent me. She's like, well, Dad, it's a 1 in 1,000 for clotting, right? My other daughter was horrified by it, right? And you have to go back and forth with facts. The issue is, I said I would never use these words together, but conspiracy adjacent belief systems are already sort of baked into the population in a massive level. And again, and I think it was questions from Autumn and Eileen, and the issue that you have when you're talking about narratives and you're talking about stories is that it's baked. and how do you unbake it, right? And I don't know how to do that. And so when you're looking at somebody who's like totally anti-vax, like, they have stuck microchips into your bloodstream, which I had a person in my distillery tell me that nanotechnology was in those vaccines. And you probably shouldn't tell a joke like, well, I don't believe that, but my only side effect was I had an overwhelming desire to buy Microsoft products, and to me, it's a joke, right? But they actually might take that as not a joke. And then you're to the point, can I even joke about this, right? Especially if this stuff has been baked in. But on the anti-vax side, that stuff's already been baked in. And there might not be crazy anti-vaxxers, but if you don't think that zinc sales have soared, or vitamin C, or some kind of protein powder, that mixes leaves from some tree in South America, we're lying to ourselves that grift is really part of this. And we talk again about how it's baked in. What's also baked in is the ability to make money off of this. And it goes all the way back to profit, the profit motive on disinformation, the profit motive on selling, what is it? Garcinia Cambogia could make you lose 100 pounds in, a month or something, right? All these stupid claims that are out there, based on, what people want to make money on. How do we get in front of that? How do you stop that? Because as that continues, it continues to bake in these memes in society, right? That vaccinations will kill you. And if I was that kind of guy, I will tell you, in 1999, on the Romanian-Serbian border, I got my 4th dose of anthrax shot and it almost killed me. There was a 1 in 1,000. They said that somebody has an adverse effect of this, and I got it. Now, did that stop me from getting vaccinations? No. I probably had 60 or 70 of them. I was in the military, for God's sakes, and traveled across the world. I honestly don't care what you put in my body anymore. I'm probably poisoned. Who cares? It's a joke.
Right.
When you say stuff to people like that, Eric, they're like, wait, you think you've been poisoned?
Yeah.
Right? And you're like, well, hold on.
Yeah.
It's baked in. So I don't know. I think you got to go right back to the basis of teaching children, right back to the education system on how we actually identify sourcing, how we identify disinformation, and a really facts-based way of looking at things, even from a young age. And I mean, I would love to give that a shot. I would love to have buddies smart enough that you could actually have some kind of curriculum like that for, schools across the country. I think that would be very cool. I don't know how to execute that, but I'm sure there's somebody smart enough that could figure it out.
Yeah. Caroline, do we have any more questions in the Q&A?
Yeah, we've got one from George. How do we educate media and public health authorities to give clear, accurate messaging that provides a strong, authoritative narrative of the facts rather than fuel misinformation? I'm especially interested in balancing the probabilistic, nuanced nature of science against the need to provide consistent messaging.
Ooh, how do we get media to do that? I mean, I think you've probably seen some examples of media that don't do it. I think that's why that's such a great question. But I almost believe when you're looking at, I think, publicly funded media, for me being sort of a fiscally conservative, sort of social libertarian, likes freedom and individual, rugged individualism, all that stuff. I also believe that we need a very strong, almost public media, and people maybe immediately think of PBS or NPR or things like that. I actually sort of believe we need almost a gatekeeper, right? That's sort of an independent, government-funded way of doing things. I don't know how to do that because they won't get great ratings. And we're in a clickbait world, not only with the clickbait media, but clickbait congressional representatives. I don't know how to do that unless we actually have a very robust government-funded sort of quasi-independent media, I guess, in television, print, digital, that can get the ideas out there. I don't know how we do that. I wish I did know how to do that. And these questions are so fantastic. I don't get these questions at the distillery, by the way. I just want everybody to know that. But usually it's what's in the bourbon. Well, it's corn.
Okay.
But and wheat and a little bit of barley. But I think it's a very difficult question. I don't know how to make the media behave. I will tell you guys this, and I will, you'll be like, oh, he's just name dropping. I am not. But I got invited to I had a little whiskey with Jake Tapper from CNN, and he said, Denver, how do we fix this? I'm like, you got to tell the truth no matter what. Like, you got to be fact-based. Journalism has to be the estate that really ensures that we're getting the facts out there and it's not just opinion for clicks or money. And he goes, you dang right. That is what we have to do. And I had a friend, at Fox too, that I had that discussion with. And, the sad thing was, some people do it and some people don't. So it is up to the media to present facts-based information. And as far as what the narrative is, or specifically what the truth is, gosh, I'm always going to go over on truth and facts, even if it doesn't match the narrative that I had to begin with. And then, caveat out by saying, hey, I didn't have all the truth, at that time. And are people brave enough to do that? I just don't know.
Yeah. Well, on that sobering note, we want to acknowledge that we're at time. But most importantly, Congressman, I want to just thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience with us today. I think it's been an immensely insightful, fun conversation for all of us. So thank you again. Thank you to all those who asked questions. I believe that we got to almost all of them. And if not, we can track down those few afterwards. But thank you all.
Probably heard I don't know more times than any other guest. I apologize for that, or I'm trying to figure it out. So, but what a fun conversation.
No, absolutely. And we will circulate the report, which has maybe some more of the answers that we've chatted about today with the recap email to this call. Thank you all. Thank you, Congressman, again. And we will be in touch for our next session in 2 weeks.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Bye-bye.